If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe and hit the bell, share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Elizabeth Parker, and this happened to me back in 1979 when I was working as a ranger and biologist in the Great Smoky Mountains. I was 43 then, with a PhD in what most people would laugh at. Cryptozoology, the study of creatures that most folks don't believe exist. But I knew better. I had seen things in those mountains that would make anyone's hair stand on end. Let me start by telling you why I was really there. Sure, I had my official job as a ranger, checking trails and helping lost hikers. But that wasn't the whole truth. Every morning, before the sun came up, I would pack my special recording equipment, machines I had modified myself to catch things that regular cameras couldn't see. You see, 3 years before, I lost my research partner Tom in these very mountains. The official report said he got lost in the mist and fell from a cliff. But I was there that day, and what I saw, well, that's why I stayed. The Smokies aren't like other mountains. The Cherokee people who lived here for thousands of years knew this. They had stories about the mist, not the normal morning fog that tourists come to photograph, but something else. Something alive. They said some places in these mountains don't follow the same rules as the rest of our world. Time works differently there. Light bends in ways it shouldn't. That morning in '79 started like any other. The mist was thick, as usual, wrapping around the trees like white fingers. I had my backpack full of equipment, my modified cameras, electromagnetic readers, and the voice recorder I never went anywhere without. I didn't know it then, but that day would change everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who would try to uncover the truth about what really lives in the mist of these ancient mountains. I can still remember the cold dampness of that morning, the way my boots crunched on the fallen leaves, and the strange electric feeling in the air. Something was different. Something was waiting. And after 30 years lost in time, I'm finally ready to tell the whole story. It was around 6:30 in the morning when my equipment first started acting weird. You know that sound your TV makes when there's bad reception? That high-pitched beeping? Well, all my devices started making that noise at once. I'd never seen anything like it before. I was walking along Trail 23, one of the less used paths that winds through the older part of the forest. The mist was thicker than usual that morning, so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. But something felt off. The birds had stopped singing, and there was this strange heaviness in the air, like right before a big storm. Then I saw it, the first geometric pattern. It was on the ground, like someone had drawn a perfect circle in the dirt, with strange lines crossing through it. But here's the thing, the lines seemed to glow slightly, giving off a faint bluish light even in the morning mist. My hands shook as I took photos and measurements. This was exactly like what I'd found near the spot where Tom disappeared. I reached for my radio to call base camp. Static. Just loud, crackling static. That's when I noticed my watch had stopped. Not just stopped. The hands were spinning backward. My heart started beating faster, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I'd been waiting for, wasn't it? 3 years of searching, and finally, something was happening. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me, not animal footsteps. These sounded human. I turned around, expecting to see another hiker, even though it was way too early for tourists. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Through the mist, I could make out a figure. It was tall, almost human-shaped, but I could see right through it, like it was made of the mist itself. I stood completely still, hardly daring to breathe. My recording equipment was going crazy in my backpack, beeping and whirring. The figure didn't move closer, but it didn't go away either. It just stood there, watching me. I slowly reached for my camera, trying not to make any sudden movements. This was the proof I'd been looking for, if I could just get one clear photo. But as I raised the camera, something even stranger happened. The air around the figure seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. And then right in front of my eyes, a tear appeared in the air itself. Like someone had taken a knife and cut right through the fabric of reality. Through that tear, I could see something else. Another place, another time, and I knew right then and there that I was about to find out what really happened to Tom. I didn't have time to think. The tear in the air was getting bigger, and my instincts were screaming at me to run, but I couldn't, not when I was this close to finding answers. I grabbed my camera and started taking pictures as fast as I could. That's when I heard the helicopter. The sound echoed through the mountains, breaking the strange silence. Within minutes, 3 black military helicopters appeared above the trees. The mist swirled around them as they got closer. I quickly hid behind a large oak tree, my heart pounding. They weren't supposed to be here. This was National Park land. The helicopters landed in a small clearing nearby, and soldiers in black uniforms jumped out. They had equipment I'd never seen before. Things that looked more advanced than my modified cameras. They moved like they knew exactly what they were looking for. "Dr. Parker," a voice called out, "we know you're here. Come out slowly." I stayed hidden, watching. How did they know my name? Then I heard one of them say something that made my skin crawl. "Sir, it's another Class 3 tier, just like the 76 incident." The 76 incident. That was when Tom disappeared. They knew, they had known all along. I was so focused on the soldiers that I almost missed what was happening behind me. The air had gotten colder, much colder. I could see my breath now, and that strange geometric pattern on the ground was glowing brighter. The tear in the air was pulsing, like a heartbeat. Through my camera lens, I saw something that changed everything. More figures were coming through the tier, 5, maybe 6 of them. They moved like they were floating, leaving trails of mist behind them. The soldiers saw them too. They raised their weapons, but it was useless. The figures passed right through them like they weren't even there. One of the soldiers collapsed, just fell to the ground without a sound. The others started backing away, their training forgotten. I watched through my camera as a strange light seemed to flow from the fallen soldier toward one of the misty figures. That's when I understood what they were doing. They weren't just watching us, they were feeding. I had to do something. But what could I do against creatures that could walk through walls? Then I remembered something from my research. An old Cherokee symbol meant to ward off evil spirits. With shaking hands, I pulled out my notebook and quickly drew it in the dirt. To my amazement, the nearest figure stopped at its edge, unable to cross. The military radio crackled to life. Fall back. Fall back. Code red. We need the containment team." I knew I had to make a choice, run away or stay and finally learn the truth about these creatures, about Tom, about everything. And believe me, the choice I made that day would change my life forever. I made my choice. I had to know the truth. While the soldiers were distracted by the chaos, I crept closer to their equipment. That's when I saw it, a folder marked Operation Mistwalker, Top Secret. With trembling hands, I grabbed it and stuffed it in my backpack. But as I turned to leave, I came face to face with one of them, Pori, a Mistwalker. Up close it was both beautiful and terrifying. I could see right through it, like looking through a waterfall. But its shape was human-like. It didn't have eyes, exactly, but I knew it was looking at me. The air around us got so cold my teeth started chattering. Then something incredible happened. It reached out, not to attack me, but to show me something. In its misty hand was a small device that looked ancient, covered in symbols I recognized from Cherokee carvings. The same symbols I'd seen in the caves where Tom disappeared. "Dr. Parker." A firm voice made me jump. I turned to see a tall man in a black suit walking towards me. He wasn't running or scared like the others. "I'm Agent Collins. We've been watching you for 3 years. We know what you've been doing." "You knew about them all along," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You knew what happened to Tom." He nodded slowly. "We've been studying them since 1943. They're not just creatures, Dr. Parker. They're travelers from another dimension, and they're trying to tell us something." Suddenly, all my equipment went crazy again. The tear in the air was getting bigger, and now there was a deep rumbling sound coming from underground. The trees started swaying without any wind. "It's happening again," Agent Collins said, looking worried. "The dimensional collapse. Just like in '76, I looked at the ancient device in the Mistwalker's hand, then at my backpack full of research. Everything I'd learned about these creatures, every recording I'd made, it was all leading to this moment. How do we stop it?" I asked. "We don't," he replied. "But you might be able to. That's why they chose you. That's why they took Tom." He was getting too close without understanding. "But you understand them." The rumbling got louder. More tiers were appearing in the air around us. Through them, I could see glimpses of other places, other times. And in one of them, I swear I saw Tom, looking exactly like he did 3 years ago, reaching out to me. The ground shook harder, and trees started cracking around us. Agent Collins grabbed my arm. "We have to get to the cave system. That's where it all started. That's where the original tear is." We ran through the forest, following the Mistwalker. The other soldiers were evacuating. Helicopters lifting off in a panic. More tiers were opening everywhere. Some small like windows, others big enough to drive a truck through. Through one, I saw dinosaurs roaming. Through another, I spotted futuristic buildings touching the sky. "The walls between dimensions are breaking down," Agent Collins shouted over the noise. "If we don't stop it, our whole reality could collapse." We reached the cave entrance. The same one where Tom vanished. Inside, the walls were covered with glowing symbols, pulsing with a blue light. The Mistwalker led us to a chamber I'd never seen before. In the center was a stone platform with a circular depression, exactly the size of the ancient device. "Tom found this place," Agent Collins explained, catching his breath. "He figured out it was some kind of doorway, but he didn't know how to close it properly." The Mistwalker held out the device to me. I took it, and it felt warm in my hands, humming with energy. I knew what I had to do, but I was scared. "If I put this in there, what happens?" I asked. "Someone has to stay with it," Collins said quietly. "To keep the balance." That's what happened to Tom T. He's trapped between dimensions, helping to keep the tears from getting worse. The cave rumbled. Rocks fell from the ceiling. We were running out of time. "Will I ever come back?" I whispered. The Mistwalker touched my shoulder. For a moment, I saw flashes. Tom, alive but different, working with them, learning their ways. He wasn't a prisoner, he was a guardian. I stepped onto the platform. "Tell my family," I started to say. "You'll tell them yourself," Collins interrupted. "Someday." With shaking hands, I placed the device into the depression. The moment it clicked in place, everything changed. The air filled with light, and I felt myself being pulled apart, not painfully, but like I was becoming part of the mist itself. The last thing I heard was Collins shouting, "Good luck, Dr. Parker." And then everything went white. I remember feeling like I was floating in a sea of white mist. Time didn't make sense anymore. One moment I felt like I'd been there for minutes, the next it seemed like centuries had passed. And then, I saw him, Tom. "Elizabeth," he smiled, looking exactly like he did the day he vanished. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually." He explained everything. The Mistwalkers weren't enemies at all, they were protectors, keeping the walls between dimensions from breaking completely. For thousands of years they'd chosen human guardians to help them. The Cherokee people were the first. "But something's gone wrong," Tom said. "The tears are getting bigger. We need more help." Together we learned to move through the mist, to see all the different times and places connected to our world. We watched civilizations rise and fall, saw dinosaurs roam, and glimpsed futures too strange to describe. But we never forgot our real job, finding tears and sealing them before they got too big. I lost track of how long I was there. In the mist, time flows differently. But one day, something changed. Tom and I felt a pull we couldn't ignore. A tier was opening in 2025, right where my story began. "It's time," Tom said. "They need us back there." When I stepped back into our world, it felt like waking up from a long dream. The sun was rising over the Smoky Mountains, just like that morning in 1979. But everything looked different. New buildings, paved roads where there used to be dirt paths. The first person I met was a young ranger. When I told her my name, her eyes got wide. "Dr. Elizabeth Parker." "But that's impossible. You disappeared 46 years ago." I looked at my reflection in her phone screen. Those were new too. I hadn't aged a day. To me, it felt like maybe a few months had passed. But here in the normal world, it had been almost half a century. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you where I've been," I said. She pointed to her equipment, which was beeping just like mine used to. "Try me. The readings have been going crazy lately. Something's coming, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yes, and this time we're ready for it. Because now I know the truth. The mist isn't just a weather phenomenon. And sometimes, if you're very careful and very brave, you can step through it. Just remember, not all who wander in the mist are lost. Some of us are guardians, keeping watch over the spaces between worlds. And if you're ever hiking in the Smoky Mountains, and see strange lights in the mist, or your phone starts acting weird, or you feel like time isn't quite right, well, just know that Tom and I are out there, watching, protecting, making sure the walls between worlds stay strong, because that's what we do. That's what we'll always do. My name is Jackson Wells, and this happened to me back in the summer of 1961. I was 47 then, working as the lead park ranger at Ozark National Forest in Arkansas. Even now, after all these years, my hands shake when I think about what happened in Devil's Gulch. Before I tell you what went down in those caves, you should know a bit about me. I wasn't always a park ranger. I served in Vietnam, and let's just say those memories still haunt me sometimes. When I came back home, I found peace in these forests, well, at least until that summer. My wife Sarah had passed away from cancer just 6 months before everything happened. The only thing I had left of her was this silver locket I always carried in my pocket. Sometimes when things got tough, I'd hold it tight and remember her smile. The forest was my home, my escape. I knew every trail, every tree, and every stream. Or at least I thought I did. The locals always had stories about Devil's Gulch, you know? They'd talk about people going missing since the 1800s, about strange noises coming from deep underground, and about the old Native American burial grounds nearby. I never paid much attention to those tales. Been here 15 years, I'd tell myself, never seen anything stranger than a confused bear or a lost hiker. But then those spelunkers disappeared. 3 of them, college kids from the university who'd gone exploring in the cave system. Good equipment, experienced climbers, proper permits, everything by the book. They should have been fine. When they didn't come back after 2 days, their families called us. That's when it all started. That's when I learned that sometimes those old stories, those warnings passed down through generations, sometimes they're more than just stories. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The fog was thick, unusually thick for summer, hanging between the trees like ghost clothes on a line. The air felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on your shoulders. As I stood at the entrance of Devil's Gulch, staring into that dark mouth of earth, something felt different. Something felt wrong. I should have listened to that feeling in my gut. Should have called in the state police, maybe even the FBI. But I didn't. Instead, I gathered my team and we went down into those caves. None of us could have imagined what was waiting for us in the darkness below. Let me tell you about that first day in the caves. My team consisted of 3 other rangers, Mike Thompson, who'd been with me for 8 years, Sarah Chen, our newest ranger but an experienced cave explorer, and Tom Baker, who knew more about the local history than anyone else. We gathered at the cave entrance around 8 a.m. The morning was unusually quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels running around. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. As we checked our equipment, I noticed Mike's hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his helmet light. "Found something weird yesterday during the preliminary search," Mike said, pulling out his phone to show us some photos. "These weren't here last month during our routine check." The pictures showed 3 backpacks, torn apart like paper. What caught my eye weren't the tears, but the marks around them. Long, deep scratches that no bear or mountain lion could have made. They were too precise, too deliberate. "That's not all," Tom added, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found these on the cave wall about 50 feet in." He showed us his own photos of some cave paintings. They were old, really old, showing strange figures with multiple limbs climbing walls and ceilings. The Native Americans had painted warning symbols all around these figures. Sarah studied the photos carefully. "My grandfather used to tell stories about creatures living in deep caves. I always thought they were just meant to scare kids away from dangerous places." I felt Sarah's locket in my pocket and took a deep breath. "All right, team, standard formation. I'll take point," Mike brings up the rear. "Radio check every 15 minutes. If anyone feels something's off, we turn back. No questions asked." As we entered the cave, our flashlight beams cut through the darkness. The temperature dropped quickly, and our footsteps echoed strangely off the walls. About 100 feet in, we found the first sign that something was very wrong. Our radio crackled with static, then died completely. At the same moment, all our compasses started spinning wildly. Tom tried to check his phone's GPS. No signal. "Just interference from the cave walls," Sarah suggested, but her voice trembled slightly. We all knew that wasn't true. These caves had never interfered with our equipment before. Then we heard it, a sound that still haunts my dreams. Like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper, coming from somewhere far below us. And mixed with it, something that sounded almost like whispering. Mike gripped my shoulder. "Jack," he said, pointing his flashlight at the ground. There, in the wet cave floor, was a single footprint. But it wasn't human, and it wasn't from any animal I'd ever seen in my 15 years as a ranger. It had multiple toe marks, spread out like a hand, but longer, with what looked like claw marks at the ends, and it was fresh. The worst part, it was on the ceiling. None of us wanted to look up after seeing that footprint, but we had to. Our flashlight beams moved slowly to the ceiling. Nothing was there, but we could see more of those strange prints leading deeper into the cave. "Maybe we should head back," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Call in some backup." I was about to agree when we heard something that made my blood run cold. A scream. It came from deeper in the cave, and it sounded human, like one of those missing spelunkers. "We can't leave if someone's still alive down there," I said, though every instinct told me to run. We moved forward, the only sound being our breathing and the drip-drip of water from the cave ceiling. The passage got narrower, and the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. Our flashlights seemed dimmer too, like something was eating the light. That's when Tom noticed something on his boots, a clear, slimy substance. It was dripping from above. Before I could stop him, he reached down to touch it. "Don't," I started to say, but it was too late. The stuff was sticky, like spiderweb but stronger. Tom tried to wipe it off, but it clung to his gloves. I can't get it off," he said, starting to panic. Then we heard it, a soft clicking sound, like someone tapping their nails on stone. It was coming from all around us. Our flashlights caught movement in the shadows, just at the edge of their beams, but whatever it was moved too fast to see clearly. Mike pressed his back against the cave wall. "There's something in here with us," he whispered. The clicking got louder, closer. Sarah's flashlight beam caught something for just a second, a pale human-like hand with too many fingers, disappearing around a corner. That's when the lights went out, all of them. At the same time, we were in complete darkness. "Everyone stay calm," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Form a circle, backs to each other." But before we could move, We heard Tom scream. It was a terrible sound, full of fear and pain. Then something pulled him up. I could feel the rush of air as he was yanked toward the ceiling. "Tom," Sarah yelled, her voice echoing off the walls. The last thing we heard from Tom was a whispered "Oh God." Then silence. Our flashlights came back on all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Tom was gone. There was just a thin trail of that slimy substance leading up into a crack in the ceiling. And on the wall, written in what looked horribly like fresh blood, were 3 words: "Get out now." We wanted to run, believe me, we did. But we couldn't leave Tom behind. Not like that. My hands were shaking as I reloaded my shotgun. Sarah was crying quietly, and Mike kept muttering, "This isn't real," over and over. "Listen," I whispered, "whatever that thing is, it's hunting us. We need to stick together," and a strange sound cut me off. It was like singing, but not normal singing. It was high-pitched, like a child's voice, but wrong somehow. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My head started to feel fuzzy, and I noticed Sarah swaying slightly. "Cover your ears," I shouted, remembering my wife's silver locket. I pulled it out and hit it against the cave wall. The sharp clicking sound seemed to break whatever spell was happening. The singing stopped. "It's trying to confuse us," Mike said, his voice stronger now, like some kind of mind trick. We had to keep moving. The cave split into 2 tunnels ahead. The left one went down, deeper into the earth. The right one seemed to curve back up. That's when we saw it. Tom's flashlight, blinking on and off at the entrance of the left tunnel. "Could be a trap," Sarah whispered. "Could be Tom asking for help," Mike replied. Before we could decide, we heard something that made us freeze. Footsteps, but not from the tunnels. They were coming from the ceiling, getting closer. The sound was all wrong, too many feet, moving too fast. Then we saw it properly for the first time. The creature dropped down from the ceiling about 20 feet away. Its skin was almost see-through, like a cavefish. It had too many arms, or legs. I couldn't tell which. But its face was the worst part. It looked almost human, but stretched wrong, with no eyes and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. It tilted its head, like it was listening to us. Then it smiled. Mike panicked. He turned and ran toward the right tunnel. "Mike, no," I yelled, but he didn't stop. The creature moved faster than anything I've ever seen. It ran along the wall like a spider, heading straight for Mike. Sarah raised her gun and fired. The shot deafening in the narrow cave. She hit it, I'm sure she did, but it didn't even slow down. We heard Mike's scream cut off suddenly, and then, nothing. Sarah and I backed up against each other, guns raised, watching every direction. The creature could be anywhere. The walls, the ceiling, behind us. Then Sarah grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Jack," she whispered, "look at the walls." I looked. In the beam of our flashlights, we could see dozens of those pale, twisted faces emerging from cracks in the rock, all of them smiling. We weren't dealing with one creature, we were in their nest. Everything happened so fast after that. Sarah and I ran down the left tunnel. We had no choice. The creatures were everywhere, crawling on the walls, dropping from the ceiling. Our flashlights caught glimpses of their pale bodies, always just at the edge of our vision. I still had my shotgun, but I knew we didn't have enough bullets for all of them. The tunnel led us to a huge cave chamber with an underground lake. The water was black as ink, and the air felt different here. Older somehow. "Look." Sarah pointed her flashlight at something near the water's edge. It was the missing spelunker's equipment, and next to it, something that made my heart stop. Ancient stone boxes covered in strange symbols, dozens of them, arranged in a circle. "They're protecting something," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "These boxes, they're important to them." Before I could respond, a horrible screech filled the chamber. The creatures were pouring in from every crack and hole in the walls, but they weren't attacking. They were surrounding us, keeping us away from the boxes. That's when I noticed the dynamite in one of the spelunkers' bags. I had an idea, a terrible, dangerous idea. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice steady, "when I say run, you run for the tunnel we came through. Don't stop, don't look back." "What are you going to do?" she asked, but I think she already knew. I grabbed the dynamite with one hand, holding my wife's locket in the other. The creatures were getting closer, their pale faces twisted in anger. "Now Sarah, run." She ran. The creatures started to move, but I held up the dynamite and my lighter. They stopped, tilting their heads like they understood. "You want to protect these boxes," I shouted. "Then let her go." I heard Sarah's footsteps fading away. The creatures were all around me now. I could hear their clicking sounds, feel their cold breath. My hands were shaking as I lit the fuse. One of them reached for me with its long, pale fingers. I saw its face up close. No eyes, but somehow I knew it was looking right at me. It touched my head, and suddenly my mind was filled with images. Ancient times, deep caves, secrets that were never meant to be found. I threw the dynamite toward the boxes and ran. The creatures screamed, a sound I'll never forget. I felt something grab my leg, heard the deafening explosion, felt the heat and the rocks falling. The last thing I remember was the cave collapsing around me. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Sarah had made it out and called for help. They found me half buried in rocks near the cave entrance, my right leg crushed so badly they had to remove it. But I was alive. That's more than I can say for Tom and Mike. The official report said it was a cave-in, blamed it on old mining tunnels giving way. Nobody mentioned the creatures. Nobody talked about the ancient boxes. When I tried to tell them, the doctors said I was confused from the trauma and blood loss. But Sarah knew the truth. She'd seen them too. We made a pact never to speak about what really happened, but we both knew those things were still down there, somewhere in the dark. They sealed off Devil's Gulch with concrete and steel bars, posted warning signs about unsafe caves. But sometimes, especially on quiet nights, people say they can hear sounds coming from deep underground, a sort of clicking noise, and something that sounds almost like singing. I quit being a ranger after that. Couldn't do the job with one leg anyway. Moved to a small house at the edge of town, far from the forest. But I keep my wife's silver locket close, and I never ever go into caves anymore. Last week, I read in the newspaper about some strange disappearances in a cave system 2 counties over. The article mentioned weird footprints on the cave ceiling, and some kind of sticky substance on the walls. I wanted to warn them, to tell them what they're dealing with. But who would believe an old man with one leg and nightmare stories? So I just sit here on my porch, watching the forest in the distance. Sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that clicking sound again. And I know they're still out there, in the deep dark places, protecting whatever was in those ancient boxes. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. Those creatures, I don't think we found their main nest. What we saw that day, all those pale faces in the darkness, I believe that was just a small group, just guards protecting those boxes. The real question is how many more are out there, hiding in other caves, waiting in the darkness, and what happens when they decide to come out. My name is Margaret Donovan, but everyone calls me Meg. What I'm about to tell you happened to me back in the winter of 1973. And even today, my hands shake when I think about those 3 terrifying weeks in Superior National Forest. I was 39 then, working as a senior ranger at the Fire Watch Tower, and yes, the white hair that makes me look older than I am. That's a reminder of what happened during those dark days. Before all this, I was pretty proud of my life. I had been an Olympic biathlete, that's cross-country skiing and shooting combined. And those skills turned out to be more useful than I could have ever imagined. The locals respected me as the tough ranger who never backed down from a challenge, but they didn't know about the pain I carried inside. You see, 20 years before all this happened, my little sister Emily disappeared in these same woods. No trace, no clues, nothing. Just gone one winter morning. I remember exactly how it all started. It was a Thursday morning in early December, and the temperature had dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze your eyelashes. I was doing my usual morning checks in the tower, sipping hot coffee and watching the sun rise over endless miles of pine trees. Everything looked normal, just another winter day in Minnesota. But then I noticed something odd. The deer were moving the wrong way. Now, I know that might not sound scary to you, but when you've spent as much time in the woods as I have, you know that animals don't just change their patterns for no reason. Something was spooking them, making entire herds run south when they should have been heading north. That was just the beginning. I didn't know then that I was about to face something that would change my life forever, something that would finally answer the question that had haunted me for 20 years, what really happened to my sister Emily? If I had known what was coming, would I have run? Honestly, I don't think so. Some mysteries demand to be solved, even if the truth turns out to be more terrifying than anything you could imagine. Let me tell you about those 3 weeks, about the things I saw in the ancient pines, about the horrors that came with the blizzard, and about a family curse I never knew existed. But I warn you, this isn't a story for the faint-hearted. Sometimes I wish I could forget it all, but as the tribal elders told me later, some stories need to be remembered, no matter how much they scare us. That morning, as I watched the deer running in panic, something else caught my eye. Near the edge of the forest, where the old hiking trail begins, I spotted strange marks in the snow. Through my binoculars, they looked like footprints, but something wasn't right about them. I radioed Tom at the main ranger station. "Hey Tom, I'm going to check something out near the East Trail. Those deer are acting weird, and I've found some unusual tracks." "Be careful, Meg," Tom crackled back through the radio. "Storm's coming in faster than expected. Don't go too far." I grabbed my gear. My rifle force of habit from my biathlon days, a flashlight, some emergency supplies, and my heavy winter coat. The wind was picking up, making the pine trees sway and creak. It reminded me of that day 20 years ago when Emily, but I pushed that thought away. As I got closer to the tracks, my heart started beating faster. These weren't normal footprints. They were human-sized, but deeper than they should be, as if whoever Whittier, or whatever made them, was incredibly heavy. And they were frozen solid, with strange ice patterns spreading out from each print like tiny frost flowers. Then I saw the first body. It was standing upright against a pine tree, completely frozen. At first I thought someone had played a cruel joke with a mannequin, but this was real. A hiker by the looks of his clothes, frozen solid with an expression of pure terror on his face. The strange thing was, there were no other tracks around him, as if he'd appeared out of nowhere. My hands shook as I reached for my radio. Tom, come in." Only static answered. The storm clouds above had turned an odd greenish-purple color, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. That's when I heard it. A voice calling my name. It sounded exactly like Emily. Meg, help me." It came from deeper in the woods, past where the frozen body stood. My mind screamed that this was impossible. Emily had been gone for 20 years, but that voice, it was definitely hers, exactly as I remembered it. I stood there, torn between running back to the tower and following the voice. The wind was getting stronger, and snow was starting to fall. Through the swirling flakes, I noticed something carved into the tree next to the frozen body. Strange symbols that looked old, very old. The voice called again, "Meg, please, I'm so cold." Against every survival instinct I had, I took one step toward that voice. That's when I saw the frost patterns on the ground beginning to spread toward me, like icy fingers reaching out to grab my boots. I knew right then that whatever was happening in these woods was beyond anything I'd dealt with before. But I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would force me to face not just the mystery of my sister's disappearance, but something far more ancient and terrifying. I backed away from those spreading frost patterns, my boots crunching in the snow. The voice that sounded like Emily called again, but this time something was different. It seemed to come from two directions at once, and there was a strange echo to it that made the hair on my neck stand up. I turned and ran back toward my tower. 20 years as a ranger had taught me one thing: when something doesn't feel right in the woods, trust your gut. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind had picked up so much that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Back in the tower, I tried the radio again. "Tom? Anyone? This is Meg at Tower 7, please respond." Nothing but static. I pulled out my logbook and wrote down everything I'd seen of the frozen body, the strange tracks, the voice. Writing things down helped me think clearly. That's when I heard the scratching. It started soft, just barely noticeable over the howling wind. Scratch, 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 coming from the windows of the tower, on all sides, like multiple hands were scraping at the glass. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it out the window. The beam cut through the swirling snow, and for a split second I saw something that made my blood run cold. A face. No, several faces pressed against the glass. They looked human, but wrong somehow. Too pale, with eyes that reflected the light like animals. Then they were gone, leaving behind frost patterns on the windows that spread like growing vines. I ran to my small bookshelf and pulled out an old book about local legends that a tribal elder had given me years ago. My hands were shaking so bad I could hardly turn the pages. That's when I found it, a page about something called the Wendigo. The description matched everything I was seeing: the ice patterns, the mimicked voices, the frozen victims. But what really stopped my heart was the last paragraph. It mentioned a curse, a family curse that could turn people into these creatures. And it happened every 20 years. Emily had disappeared exactly 20 years ago. The scratching got louder, and now I could hear voices, not just Emily's but my parents', old friends, even my own voice calling out to me. The storm outside was getting worse, and the temperature in the tower was dropping fast. I could see my breath in the air. I knew I had 3 problems. First, I was trapped in this tower. Second, whatever these things were, they wanted in. And third, worst of all, I was starting to think I knew what had really happened to my sister. The lights in the tower flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. In the darkness, I heard a loud crack from one of the windows. The window didn't break, but the crack spread like a spiderweb across the glass. I grabbed my emergency lantern and switched it on. The scratching had stopped, but now I heard something worse. Footsteps on the metal stairs outside, slowly coming up to my tower. Thud, thud, thud. I grabbed my rifle and backed into a corner. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then a knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. "Meg?" It was Emily's voice again, but different now. Older, like she'd aged the 20 years she'd been missing. "Meg, let me in. I can explain everything." My hands gripped the rifle tighter. "You're not Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My sister disappeared 20 years ago." A laugh came from behind the door. A sad, hollow sound. "Yes, I disappeared. But I never died, Meg. I changed. And now it's time you learned the truth about our family." The door handle started to turn slowly. I raised my rifle, but something made me hesitate. Through the frosted glass of the door, I could see a figure, and it moved just like Emily used to men. That slight tilt of the head she always had when she was about to tell me something important. "Don't come in," I warned. "I don't want to shoot." "You won't," the voice said softly. "You can't. Because deep down you know who I am. And you need to know why this is happening." The door opened, and there she was, my sister Emily, but not like I remembered her. Her hair had turned pure white and her skin was pale as snow, but her eyes, they were still the same green eyes I remembered, just sadder now. "We need to talk, big sister," she said, staying in the doorway. "About the curse that's followed our family for generations, about why I had to disappear, and about what's coming for both of us tonight." Outside, the storm howled louder, and through the windows, I could see more shapes moving in the swirling snow. Emily glanced over her shoulder at them. "They're getting hungry," she said. And we don't have much time. I kept my rifle pointed at her, but my hands were shaking. Start talking, I said. Start with what happened 20 years ago. Emily stepped into the tower, closing the door behind her. As she did, frost spread from her footsteps across the floor. She looked at me with those familiar eyes and said, "It started with our great-grandmother's choice back in 1893. Emily sat down on the floor, keeping her distance from me. The frost patterns spread around her like a delicate carpet. My rifle was still aimed at her, but my arms were getting tired. Our great-grandmother Sarah," Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper, "made a deal one winter. A terrible deal. Her children were dying from hunger, and she met something in these woods. It offered to save them, but at a price." A howl came from outside, making the windows rattle. Emily flinched. "The deal was simple," she continued. "Her family would never go hungry again. But every 20 years one female child from our family would have to join them. The Wendigo pack. If we refused," she shuddered, "the entire family would be hunted down." "That's crazy," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I remembered things. How our mother always looked scared when winter came. How she made us wear special necklaces with strange symbols. How she cried on Emily's 13th birthday. 20 years ago, Emily said, looking at her hands, "it was my turn. Mom knew, that's why she was so sad. But she couldn't tell us that was part of the deal too." Another crash came from outside, closer this time. Emily jumped up. "They're getting impatient, Meg. I've kept them waiting too long." She walked to the window and pressed her hand against it. "I'm their leader now, but even I can't control them forever. They want you." My throat felt dry. "Me? Why?" "Because I broke the rules. I came to warn you. To give you a chance I never had." She turned to face me, and I saw tears freezing on her cheeks. "You have two choices, Meg. Join us willingly, or..." Suddenly, all the windows rattled at once. Dark shapes pressed against every pane of glass. Emily's face turned desperate. "They're here. You have to choose now. Join us or run. But if you run," she glanced at the shapes outside, "they'll hunt you down. And anyone who tries to help you." I heard Tom's voice crackle through the radio. "The first signal in hours. Meg? Meg? We're coming to get you. Rescue team is on the way." Emily's eyes went wide with fear. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. If they come here..." She grabbed my arm, her touch ice cold. "You have to stop them, Meg, or they'll all die." I looked at my sister, then at the radio, then at the dark shapes surrounding us. I had to make a choice, and fast. I grabbed the radio, my hands shaking. "Tom, no, stay away from here." But all I got back was static. Emily was pacing now, frost trailing behind her every step. "There's a third choice," I said, suddenly, remembering something from the book I'd read. The tribal elders book mentioned a ritual, a way to break curses. Emily stopped pacing. "No, Meg." She looked terrified. "It's too dangerous. No one's ever survived it." Another voice crackled through the radio. The rescue team was only minutes away. The shapes outside were getting more agitated, scratching harder at the windows. "Tell me about the ritual," I demanded. "Emily, please. There must be a way to end this." She closed her eyes. "It needs 3 things: fire from the oldest pine tree, blood from a cursed one, and..." She hesitated. "It has to be done when the northern lights are strongest." I looked out the window. Through the swirling snow, I could see the faint green glow of the aurora borealis beginning to appear. "The lights are starting," I said, "and I know which pine tree you mean. The ancient one where I found the frozen body." Emily grabbed my shoulders. "Meg? Listen to me. Even if you get the fire in my blood, the ritual itself..." She was interrupted by a loud crash from downstairs. The rescue team had arrived. "They're here," voices called from below. "Ranger Donovan." Emily's face turned desperate. "We're out of time. They're coming up the stairs." I could hear footsteps coming up. and at the same time, the shapes outside started breaking through the windows. Glass shattered as pale, twisted figures began crawling in. The temperature dropped so low it hurt to breathe. I had seconds to decide. Try the ritual, run with the rescue team, or join my sister's pack. Whatever I chose would change everything. That's when I saw it, the old oil lamp in the corner, and I knew what I had to do. "Emily," I said, grabbing the lamp, "do you trust me?" The rescue team was almost at our door. The Wendigos were halfway through the windows, and my sister, looking more human than ever, whispered, "I always have." I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the emergency exit. "When I say run, run to the old pine tree," I whispered. Then I threw open the main door, facing the rescue team. "Get back down," I screamed at them. "Run, now." 3 men stood there, their flashlights showing their shocked faces as they saw Emily and the creatures coming through the windows. They didn't need to be told twice. They turned and ran. I smashed the oil lamp on the floor and threw my lit matchbox on it. Fire spread quickly across the wooden floor. The Wendigos screamed, I screamed, in a horrible sound that made my ears hurt. They backed away from the flames. "Run!" I yelled at Emily and we burst through the emergency exit onto the outer platform. The metal was so cold it burned through my boots. Wind and snow whipped at our faces as we climbed down the icy stairs. Behind us, the tower was catching fire. Above us, the northern lights were getting brighter, turning the snow-filled sky green and purple. The Wendigos were following, but keeping their distance from Emily. We ran through the deep snow toward the old pine tree. I could hear the pack following, their feet crunching in the snow, their breathing like winter wind. Emily was leaving a trail of frost behind her, and my lungs felt like they were freezing from the inside. "They won't let us do it," Emily gasped as we ran. "They'll stop us, just keep running." I grabbed her hand tighter. The old pine tree was just ahead, its massive trunk glowing under the northern lights. We reached the tree, but we weren't alone. The whole pack had circled us, at least 10 of them, their pale bodies glowing, their eyes reflecting the fire from the burning tower behind us. Emily squeezed my hand. "What now?" I pulled out my knife. "The ritual. Quick, how do we start it?" The Wendigos were closing in. The fire from the tower was reflecting off the snow, making everything glow orange and green. Emily's voice shook as she said, "We need to." But before she could finish, one of the Wendigos leaped at us, its claws reaching for my throat. Emily pushed me aside and caught the attacking Wendigo with her bare hands. "Start the ritual," she screamed, wrestling with the creature. "Cut the tree's bark and light it." My hands were shaking as I cut a deep line in the ancient pine's bark. Sap oozed out, glowing strangely in the northern lights. I fumbled with my last matches, finally getting one lit despite the howling wind. The moment the flame touched the sap, it burst into bright blue fire. The Wendigos shrieked and backed away. "Your blood, Emily," I shouted. "We need your blood." Emily broke free from the creature and ran to me. Without hesitating, she cut her palm with my knife. Her blood wasn't red anymore. It was almost clear, like ice water. When it dripped onto the burning sap, the flames turned purple. "Now what?" I asked, holding on to her. "Now." Emily's voice changed, becoming deeper. "Now you have to choose, Meg. The ritual needs a sacrifice. One of us has to stay. Forever." The Wendigos were circling closer again. The northern lights were directly above us now, so bright it was like daytime. The fire from the tower was spreading through the trees. "I'll do it," I said, but Emily pushed me back. "No," she smiled sadly. "I've been lost for 20 years already. But you have to live. To tell our story. To keep others safe." She hugged me, her cold body making me shiver. "I love you, big sister." Before I could stop her, Emily pressed both hands against the burning tree. The purple flames crawled up her arms. The Wendigos started screaming. Not in anger now, but in pain. "Emily, no." I tried to pull her away, but I couldn't touch her. She was burning too hot and too cold at the same time. "Run, Meg," she shouted. "Run now." The northern lights suddenly shot down like lightning, hitting the tree. Everything went white. I woke up in the snow, the morning sun bright in my eyes. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The storm was gone. The second thing was my hair. It had turned completely white overnight. The old pine tree stood there, blackened but still alive. There was no sign of Emily or the Wendigos. Just frost patterns on the tree's bark, shaped like a handprint. Emily's last touch. I heard voices calling my name. The rescue team had come back with help. They found me sitting in the snow, staring at the tree. The watchtower was nothing but smoking ruins. "What happened here?" they kept asking. I just shook my head. Later, they found the frozen body I'd discovered, but it had thawed out, just a lost hiker now. They blamed the strange events on the storm, on cold-induced hallucinations. But I knew the truth. That was 2 years ago. I still work in these woods, but in a different tower now. Every month on the full moon I go to that old pine tree and leave something, luckily a flower, a photo, a letter to Emily. The frost patterns always change after I leave, forming words like safe or love you. Sometimes on very cold nights when the northern lights are bright, I think I hear Emily's voice in the wind. But it's not scary anymore. It's more like a reminder, a whisper saying I'm still watching over you. Only one thing still bothers me. The day after it all happened, I counted the Wendigo bodies that the fire and ritual destroyed. There were 9. But I remember seeing 10 that night. That's why I'm telling you this story. If you're ever in these woods in winter and you hear a voice calling that sounds just like someone you love, don't follow it. Run. Run as fast as you can. And if you see frost patterns spreading across your window at night, or hear scratching at your door, well, now you know what it might be. Last week something happened that I need to tell you about. I was doing my usual night check at my new tower when the radio crackled to life. "Meg," a young woman's voice came through. "Is this Ranger Donovan?" "Yes, who is this?" I asked. "My name is Sarah," she said, her voice shaking. "Sarah Donovan. I think we're related. And I need your help." The frost patterns started appearing on my windows last night. My heart stopped. Sarah Donovan, my cousin's daughter. She would be about 13 now. "Listen to me carefully, Sarah," I said, already grabbing my gear. "Lock your doors. Put salt on your windowsills. I'm coming to get you." As I rushed to my truck, I saw the northern lights beginning to shine above the trees. And in the snow near my tower there were fresh footprints, human-sized but deeper than they should be. With frost spreading from their edges, the curse wasn't over. It had just skipped a generation, and this time I was ready for it. But that's another story. For another time. My name is Frank Rivera, and this happened to me back in 1985. A year I'll never forget. I was 52 then, working as a senior ranger at Yellowstone National Park. The story I'm about to tell you, well, sometimes I still wake up in cold sweat thinking about it. Before I tell you what happened, you should know a bit about me. I spent 15 years as a Marine Scout sniper before becoming a ranger. My wife, Sarah, passed away when our daughter Lisa was just 10. Being part of the Crow tribe, I grew up with stories of spirits and ancient beings, but I never thought I'd face them myself. That summer started like any other at Yellowstone. Steam rising from the geysers in the morning, tourists taking photos of Old Faithful, and bears rummaging through poorly secured trash cans. I loved my job, but smell of pine trees, the sound of wolves in the distance, and the feeling of being one with nature. But everything changed on June 15th. I remember that date clearly because it was the day Tom Walker, one of our youngest rangers, disappeared. At first we thought it was just another case of someone getting lost in the park. It happens sometimes, even to experienced rangers. But something felt different this time. I was doing my morning patrol when I got the radio call about Tom. The weird thing was, just minutes before that call, I had seen something that made my skin crawl. All the geese near Lake Yellowstone were flying away, hundreds of them, like they were running from something. and the water in the hot springs, it looked darker than usual, almost like rust. Little did I know, these were just the first signs of what was coming. The ancient evil that had been sleeping beneath Yellowstone for centuries was waking up, and somehow, my family was going to be right in the middle of it all. I'm telling you this story now, because people need to know what really happened that summer. About the blood moon, the skinwalkers, and why some parts of Yellowstone are still closed off for maintenance. But most importantly, about the sacrifice that saved not just the park, but maybe the whole world. Let me take you back to where it all started that morning when Tom disappeared, and our world turned upside down. I remember the morning Tom disappeared. I was in my ranger cabin, drinking my usual black coffee, when my radio crackled to life. Tom hadn't checked in for his morning report, something he'd never missed in his 2 years at the park. "Frank, you there?" It was Sarah Chen, my deputy. Her voice sounded worried. "Yeah, go ahead, Sarah. Tom's truck is at Bear Creek Trail, but there's no sign of him. His backpack and radio are still in the truck." My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Tom would never leave his gear behind. I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The drive to Bear Creek was strange. Usually you'd see deer or elk around, but the woods were empty and quiet. Too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels running around. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes the hair on your neck stand up. When I got there, Sarah was standing by Tom's truck, looking pale. "Frank, you need to see this." She led me to a spot about 50 feet from the truck. There, in the mud, were footprints, but they weren't normal. They started as human boots, then suddenly changed. The next steps looked like massive wolf prints, but wrong somehow, like something trying to copy a wolf, but not getting it quite right. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah whispered. Neither had I, but something in my gut recognized them. Something from the stories my grandmother used to tell me about shape-shifting creatures that walked our lands. Just then my phone rang. It was Lisa, my daughter, calling from college. "Dad, I'm coming home." "What? Why? Is everything okay?" I had that dream again, the one about Mom, but this time it was different. "She told me to come home. She said you were in danger." My mouth went dry. Lisa had never met my grandmother, but she was having the same kind of dreams the old medicine women used to talk about. As I stood there, the steam from the nearby geysers seemed to grow thicker, and I swear I could hear whispers in it. The sun was setting, turning the steam blood red, and I knew right then, this was just the beginning of something much bigger, and much worse. "Frank," Sarah's voice snapped me back. "What do we do about Tom?" I looked at the strange tracks one more time. "We need to call in the search team." "But Sarah, don't tell them about these prints." "Not yet." Little did I know, keeping that secret would be the first of many mistakes I'd make in the coming days. The search for Tom went on all day, but we found nothing, not even a trace. By sunset I was back in my cabin, trying to make sense of those strange footprints, when I heard a car pulling up. It was Lisa. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "Dad," she said, hugging me tight. Something she hadn't done since she was little. "The dreams are getting worse." We sat at my old kitchen table, the one her mom used to serve breakfast on. Lisa's hands were shaking as she held her coffee mug. "I keep seeing Mom in these dreams," she said. "She's standing by Old Faithful crying. She points at the ground and tries to tell me something, but I can't hear her over the sound of wolves howling." Just then my radio came alive. Frank, come in." It was Mike Collins, another ranger. His voice was shaking. "Go ahead, Mike. You need to see this. I'm at the old burial grounds. The ground is moving." Lisa's coffee mug dropped from her hands. She was staring at me with wide eyes. "Dad, that's where Mom appears in my dreams." I grabbed my gear and told Lisa to stay put. Of course, she didn't listen. She followed me to my truck, jumping in before I could stop her. The drive to the burial grounds was the longest 15 minutes of my life. The moon was rising, bigger and redder than usual. The steam from the geysers looked like ghostly figures dancing in our headlights. When we arrived, Mike was standing frozen, pointing his flashlight at the ground. The dirt was moving all right, but not like an earthquake. It was pulsing like something breathing underground. Then we saw the Myrgang. Ancient tribal symbols carved into nearby rocks glowing with a faint red light. I recognized some of them from my grandmother's teachings. They were warnings about skinwalkers, ancient evil spirits that could take any form they wanted. "Dad," Lisa whispered, gripping my arm. "Look at the steam." The geyser's steam was forming shapes: wolves, bears, eagles, but twisted, wrong somehow. And in the middle of it all, I swear I saw a woman's figure. She looked just like Sarah, my late wife. Suddenly, Mike's flashlight caught something moving in the trees. Something big. We heard a growl that didn't sound like any animal I'd known in my 20 years at Yellowstone. "Get back to the truck," I said quietly. Now, but as we turned to leave, we heard Mike scream. When I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. Only his flashlight remained, rolling on the ground, its beam pointing at fresh tracks in the dirt.
The same strange tracks
We'd found at Tom's truck. Lisa's voice trembled. "Dad, what's happening?" I wished I could tell her everything would be okay. But standing there, watching that red moon rise over Yellowstone, I knew we were in for the fight of our lives. Back at the ranger station, I called an emergency meeting. Sarah Chen, the 3 remaining rangers, and Lisa sat around the worn-out conference table. The room was tense. You could feel it in the air. 2 rangers gone in 24 hours, I said, spreading out a map of Yellowstone. Both disappearances happened near the old burial grounds. My finger traced a circle on the map. Then Lisa spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. "There's something else. The animals are acting strange." She pulled out her phone, showing us videos she'd taken on our way back. Herds of elk running in the wrong direction for this time of year. Bears abandoning their usual feeding grounds. Even the birds were flying in weird patterns. Sarah leaned forward, her face looking worried. "Frank, remember those tourist photos from yesterday? The ones with the shadow figures?" I nodded, pulling them out. 3 different tourists had captured the same thing. Dark shapes moving through the geyser steam. Shapes that looked almost human, but not quite. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Outside we could hear the wind picking up, whistling through the trees in a way that made my skin crawl. "I need to show you something," I said, pulling out an old leather book. My grandmother had given it to me years ago. Inside were stories about skinwalkers, ancient beings that could change shape and possess both animals and humans. According to this, I explained, they grow stronger during a blood moon. And guess what's happening in 3 days? The room went quiet. We all knew about the upcoming blood moon eclipse. It was supposed to be the biggest tourist attraction this month. Then one of the younger rangers, Jack, spoke up. "How do we know who to trust, if these things can possess people?" Before anyone could answer, we heard a wolf howl. But it wasn't like any wolf cry I'd heard in my decades at the park. It sounded almost human. Lisa grabbed my arm. "Dad, look." She was pointing out the window. In the distance, Old Faithful was acting up, shooting steam hours before its scheduled time. But what made our blood run cold was the color of the steam. It was turning red in the moonlight. Sarah's radio crackled to life. Through the static we heard screaming. Then a voice. It sounded like Mike, the ranger who'd disappeared just hours ago. "Help, they're using our faces. Don't trust." The transmission cut off. I looked around the room at my team, at my daughter. I could see the fear in their eyes, but also determination. We needed a plan, and fast. "First thing tomorrow," I said, "we visit Joseph Running Bear. If anyone knows more about these creatures, it's him. He's the oldest Crow elder in the area." What I didn't tell them was that Joseph was also the last person to see my wife alive before she disappeared near those same burial grounds 15 years ago. The drive to Joseph Running Bear's cabin took us through the darkest part of the park. Lisa sat next to me holding my grandmother's book. Sarah Chen followed in her ranger truck behind us. Joseph lived alone in a small cabin near the edge of the park. As we pulled up, I noticed something odd. All his windows were covered with strange symbols painted in red clay. "Frank Rivera," Joseph said as he opened his door before I could knock. "I've been expecting you." His eyes moved to Lisa and he nodded slowly. "The dreams brought you here, didn't they, child?" Inside, Joseph's cabin smelled of sage and pine. He sat us down and poured tea that tasted like wild berries. His old hands shook slightly as he spoke. "The skinwalkers are back," he said. "They've been sleeping under the park for hundreds of years, but now," he looked out his window at the rising moon, "now they're hungry. What do they want?" Lisa asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Power, life force. They feed on it," Joseph replied. "And during a blood moon they can perform a ritual that will make them strong enough to spread beyond Yellowstone." Sarah leaned forward. "How do we stop them?" Just then we heard something scratch at the door. Joseph went very still. "Nobody move," he whispered. Through the window I saw a large shadow pass by. It looked like a bear, but its movements were all wrong, like a person trying to walk on all fours. "It's trying to find a way in," Joseph said quietly. "The symbols protect us, but they won't last long." The scratching got louder. Lisa grabbed my hand and I felt her trembling. "Listen carefully," Joseph said, his voice urgent. "The skinwalkers have a leader, an alpha. It's the oldest and strongest of them all. To stop them you must stop it before the blood moon ritual. But be careful, it can take the shape of anyone it kills." The scratching suddenly stopped. We heard footsteps, human footsteps, and then a voice that made my blood freeze. "Frank, Lisa, please help me." It was Sarah's voice, my dead wife's voice, coming from outside. Lisa started to stand, but I held her back. Through the window we could see a figure that looked exactly like her mother, standing in the moonlight. Sarah Chen pulled out her gun, but Joseph stopped her. "Bullets won't help. You need ancient weapons blessed by tribal elders." He walked to an old chest and pulled out something wrapped in deerskin. "This belonged to your grandmother, Frank. A knife made from thunderbird bones. It's one of the few things that can hurt them." The thing outside was still calling with my wife's voice, but now it was changing, becoming angry, inhuman. "You have until the blood moon rises," Joseph said, pressing the knife into my hands. "After that it will be too late. The ritual will begin, and they'll need a sacrifice, someone with both ranger and tribal blood." Lisa and I looked at each other as the truth hit us. They weren't just after random victims, they were after Lisa. The windows suddenly rattled as something huge slammed against the cabin walls. We had to get out of there, fast. Joseph quickly led us to a trap door hidden under an old rug. "This tunnel leads to the back of the mountain," he said. "Go now." Just as we started climbing down, the cabin's front door exploded inward. Through the opening I saw something that still haunts my nightmares, a creature that kept shifting between human and animal shapes, like a terrible dance. "Run," Joseph shouted, throwing something that looked like burning sage at the creature. "I'll hold it off." The tunnel was dark and narrow. I led the way with my flashlight, Lisa behind me, and Sarah Chen bringing up the rear. Above us we could hear crashes and Joseph chanting in our tribal language. "Dad?" Lisa whispered as we ran. "I recognize this tunnel from my dreams. Mom was trying to show me this place." Suddenly Sarah Chen called out from behind us. "Wait, I think I heard something back there." I turned my flashlight toward her, and my heart stopped. Sarah's eyes had changed, they were glowing yellow in the dark. "Lisa, run." I pushed my daughter ahead, just as Sarah's face began to transform. Her jaw stretched out, teeth growing longer, fingers turning into claws. "You're not Sarah," I said, pulling out Joseph's bone knife. "What did you do to the real Sarah Chen?" The thing that wasn't Sarah smiled, showing too many teeth. "Poor Frank, always so slow to figure things out, just like when your wife died." I slashed at it with the knife, and it jumped back with a hiss. The blade had left a burning mark on its arm. "Dad!" Lisa screamed from up ahead. "There's another tunnel here. Go!" I yelled back. "Follow it. I'll catch up." The creature lunged at me, but years of military training kicked in. I rolled to the side, slashing again with the knife. This time I caught it across the chest. It screamed. A sound that was part human, part animal, and all wrong. I ran toward Lisa's voice, the creature's howls echoing behind me. The tunnel split into two paths. I had to choose fast. That's when I noticed something on the wall. A handprint in red clay. The same kind Joseph used for his protective symbols. "Lisa," I called out. "Here, Dad. Follow my voice." I took the tunnel with the handprint, running as fast as I could. Up ahead, I could see Lisa's flashlight beam. We emerged from the tunnel into a small clearing. The red moon was higher now, casting everything in a bloody light. In the distance we could see Old Faithful, steam rising like ghostly fingers into the night sky. "Dad, look." Lisa pointed at the ground. There were more symbols drawn in red clay, forming a circle. "These are fresh." Before I could answer, we heard howling, lots of it, coming from all directions. And mixed with the howls was something else. Human screams. "They're hunting," I said, gripping the bone knife tighter. "And I think I know where they're taking their victims." Lisa nodded, looking toward Old Faithful. "The ritual site. That's where Mom keeps pointing in my dreams." We had less than 2 days until the blood moon would be full. 2 days to save the missing rangers, stop the skinwalkers, and keep Lisa safe. But first, we needed help, and I knew just where to find it. We made our way to a place I hadn't visited in years, my grandmother's old storage cabin. If Joseph was right, we needed traditional weapons, and I knew Grandma had kept some ancient tribal artifacts there. "Stay close," I told Lisa as we approached the small cabin. The moon cast strange shadows through the trees, and every rustle of leaves made us jump. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and old leather. I moved my flashlight across the walls until I found what I was looking for. An old wooden chest with crow feathers carved into it. "Dad, listen," Lisa whispered suddenly. Through the cabin's thin walls, we could hear something moving outside. Multiple somethings. They were trying to be quiet, but I could hear them circling the cabin. "Quick," I said, opening the chest. Inside were things I remembered from my childhood. A bow made of thunderbird bones, like the knife, arrows tipped with blessed silver, and small bags of herbs my grandmother used for protection. Lisa picked up a leather pouch, filled with red powder. "This looks like what Joseph used." A voice called from outside, this time it was Mike's voice. "Frank." "Lisa. Thank God I found you. Please, let me in." But we knew better now. I handed Lisa the bow and some arrows while I filled my pockets with the herb bags. Then we heard another voice. Tom's voice. From the other side of the cabin. And another voice. And another. They were all out there using the voices of people they'd taken. "The back window," I whispered to Lisa. "When I say run, go through it as fast as you can." I took out Joseph's knife and one of the herb bags. Just like he had done, I threw the herbs into the air and whispered the protection words my grandmother had taught me. "Run." We burst through the window as the creatures broke down the cabin's door. In the moonlight, I could see them clearly now. Twisted shapes that couldn't decide if they were human or animal. Lisa fired an arrow at the nearest one. It struck true, and the creature screamed, falling back as silver light burned through it. We ran through the woods, the sound of pursuit close behind us. But something was wrong. The creatures weren't catching up even though they could have. They were hurting us, I realized with horror. "Lisa, stop," I yelled. But it was too late. We burst into a clearing and found ourselves surrounded. 7 creatures, all half human, half animal, formed a circle around us. And in front of us stood something worse. A figure that kept changing forms rapidly, like a flickering TV screen. 1 second it was Sarah Chen, then Tom, then my wife, then a massive wolf, then something I can't even describe. "The Alpha Skinwalker. The daughter of 2 bloodlines," it said in a voice that was many voices at once. "Perfect for our ritual." I raised the bone knife, pushing Lisa behind me. "You'll have to go through me first." The Alpha smiled with too many teeth. "Oh, Frank. That's exactly what your wife said too." That's when I realized I finally knew what had really happened to my wife all those years ago. Lisa, I whispered, when I move, run toward Old Faithful. The Alpha stepped closer, still wearing that terrible smile. Your wife discovered us, Frank. She found our sleeping place near the burial grounds. Just like you, she tried to protect everyone, and just like you're about to, she failed. I gripped the bone knife tighter. You killed her. No, Frank, we made her one of us. And now she's here. From the circle of creatures, one stepped forward. As it moved, its shape changed, until I was staring at my wife Sarah, exactly as she looked 15 years ago. But her eyes were wrong. Mom, Lisa's voice cracked. Don't listen to them, Lisa, I said, but my hands were shaking. Sarah, or the thing that looked like her, reached out. I've missed you both so much. Join us. We can be a family again. That's when I noticed something important. The steam from Old Faithful was moving strangely, forming a pattern I recognized from my grandmother's teachings. A sign. I threw the last bag of herbs into the air. Now, Lisa. The herbs burst into bright blue flames, startling the creatures. Lisa ran, shooting arrows as she went. I slashed with the bone knife, keeping them back. After them, the Alpha roared. We ran toward Old Faithful, creatures closing in from all sides. The thing wearing Sarah's face was right behind us, calling our names. The geyser, I shouted to Lisa. Get to the geyser. Old Faithful was about to erupt. I could feel it in the ground. Steam was building up, making it hard to see. We reached the boardwalk just as the creatures surrounded us again. The Alpha appeared in front of us, now looking like a mixture of all its forms. No more running, it growled. But I wasn't looking at it. I was looking past it, at the steam vents where more symbols were appearing, glowing red in the darkness. Symbols just like the ones from Joseph's cabin and my grandmother's chest. The ground started to shake. Old Faithful was ready to blow. Lisa, I said calmly, do you trust me? She grabbed my hand and nodded. The Alpha lunged at us just as I pulled out my grandmother's last gift, a small pouch I'd kept hidden. Inside was the most powerful protection herb of all. For the tribe, I whispered, throwing the herbs into the steam just as Old Faithful erupted. The ground exploded with steam and hot water. But this wasn't a normal eruption. The herbs had turned the steam into something else. It glowed with a bright blue light, just like my grandmother had described in her stories. The skinwalkers screamed as the blessed steam touched them. The Alpha stumbled backward, its shape changing wildly between forms. Lisa. The arrows, I shouted over the roar of the geyser. She understood immediately. We both began shooting arrows through the glowing steam. When they passed through it, they caught the blue light, becoming even more powerful. The thing that looked like Sarah, the creature that had once been my wife, came toward us one last time. For a moment, I saw something in her eyes, something familiar. Frank, she whispered, and for the first time in 15 years, it sounded like my real wife. And this set me free. I raised the bone knife, my hand steady now. I love you, Sarah. The knife plunged into her heart just as another arrow from Lisa struck the Alpha. The glowing steam surrounded us all. Sarah's body dissolved into light, but her smile, mere real smile, was the last thing I saw. She was finally free. The Alpha let out a terrible scream. All around us, the other skinwalkers were being pulled apart by the blessed steam. Their stolen faces melted away, revealing their true forms before they disappeared. But the Alpha wasn't finished. It lunged at Lisa one last time, its claws reaching for her. I didn't think. I just moved. I jumped between them, feeling those claws tear into me instead of my daughter. Lisa screamed. I fell to my knees, but I was smiling. The Alpha had made one final mistake. It was too close to the geyser now, too close to the blessed steam. The knife, Lisa, I called out. Throw it into the geyser. She didn't hesitate. The bone knife flew through the air, passing through the heart of the Alpha, and plunged into the center of Old Faithful. There was a moment of complete silence. Then the geyser erupted one final time, more powerful than ever before. The Alpha screamed as the blessed water tore it apart, taking all its evil with it into the depths of the earth. I felt myself getting weaker. Lisa held me as the steam began to clear. "Dad, stay with me," she cried. "Please." I could see the moon above us, no longer blood red, but its normal silver color. And in its light, I swear I saw Sarah again, smiling down at us both. "It's okay," I told Lisa. "Your mom's waiting for me. But you have to stay. The park needs a protector now, Dad, please." Those were the last words I heard before everything went dark. I didn't expect to wake up, but 3 days later, I opened my eyes in Yellowstone's medical center. Lisa was asleep in a chair next to my bed, holding my hand. The doctors called it a miracle. They couldn't explain how I survived those deep wounds, but I knew I had seen Sarah in that space between life and death, and she had sent me back. "Lisa needs you," she had said. "The park needs you both." When I was strong enough to walk, Lisa and I went back to Old Faithful. The missing rangers had all been found, alive but with no memory of what had happened. The official report called it a mass confusion incident caused by gas leaks from the geysers, but things were different now. We could feel it. The park had changed, and so had we. Joseph Running Bear visited me in the hospital. He smiled when he saw the new necklace Lisa wore, a small pouch filled with protective herbs. "The skinwalkers are gone," he said, "sealed deep underground by your sacrifice in the blessed waters. But there will be other things, other dangers. The park has always attracted dark creatures." He was right. Over the next few months we noticed small signs. The animals acted differently around Lisa now, more respectful, almost like they recognized her. And sometimes when the moon was full we could see faint symbols glowing near the geysers, protecting the boundaries of the park. Lisa decided to stay at Yellowstone, training to become a ranger like me. Together we would protect this place, just like my wife had tried to do 15 years ago. Sometimes, on quiet nights by Old Faithful, I swear I can still hear Sarah's voice in the steam, watching over us. And when the moon rises over the mountains, I know we made the right choice. This is our home, our responsibility. The tourists still come and go, taking pictures of the geysers, never knowing how close they came to real darkness. And that's okay. Let them enjoy the beauty of Yellowstone. Lisa and I will be here, standing guard, protecting them from the things that lurk in the shadows. Because that's what rangers do. That's what family does. And somewhere out there in the mist and steam of this ancient place, Sarah is smiling, knowing her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Her daughter became the protector she was meant to be. And I finally understood what my grandmother meant when she said, "Some stories never really end. They just become part of something bigger."